I've been there for lunch with John and whatever, and I get that. I get that. You know, it's like overwhelmed with people talking about stuff.
He had to explain. Doing the right thing for the Shabbat. Emmy Mechanoia? Mechanoia.
Metanoia?
Yeah, but that's mechanism in industry. I'm sorry. Those days are gone.
Barbara is on. I've got her video off and I got her muted.
It's wrong to look at this. Dialogue with this.
It's up to you because we could use that front camera too.
But I mean, Barbara to see me.
Unless I use that camera. There's one in the front of the
Are there two cameras?
Yeah, I could use either one. It's up to you.
You saw Joseph. It's absolutely natural. It's natural.
Do what's natural. I'll take care of it.
Okay, so I'm looking forward to introducing you, and we sort of mixed it up a little bit, so you're going to be wherever you want to be.
Oh, so
You know the
because
way.
Is it better to be there?
well, I think over here would be good, so that way I could use this back camera to get pictures of the audience asking questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then is it better to introduce both people at the very front?
That's what I did. Yeah.
Or if you wanted to do like a stand or something like that, you could use the podium too. David did. Either way, we just want to make sure that we keep this area sort of clear, so we don't get the back of your head. That makes sense.
If I use the podium,
I knew Frank Gehry actually. Warehouse.
We're going to sing number 8. And then we're going to add a different song that you probably know in and back and forth with it. So just follow us if you can.
Last night I had the strangest dream I never had before. I dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end to war. I dreamed there was a
Bravo. Where's the angels part? So,
Oh yeah, we just decided to.
oh, daddy.
Well, welcome back from our break, everyone, and welcome to John Quincy and also to Lilia Mariano. We're just delighted to have you with us by Zoom, and we appreciate that you are here, and we wish you were in person, but we're delighted to have you with us in this way. I'd like to introduce both of our panelists today. John Quiring, of course, is our program director here at the Center for Process Studies here in Claremont, California. He's responsible for both for seminars and for conferences, as well as visiting scholars. At Victor Valley College, Victorville, he teaches Introduction to Philosophy, Contemporary Moral Issues, and Philosophy of Religion. He is a co-organizer of the Society for the Study of Process Philosophies, and at the Seizing an Alternative Conference, he organized a tract on Whitehead's Philosophy of Religion and also chaired Section I. And thank you so much for organizing this conference, John. We're deeply indebted to you. Thank you.
My pleasure.
And Lilia is a Brazilian educator who has distinguished herself.
You got the wrong person.
Oh,
Barbara Muraca.
oh, I'm so sorry.
I would like to be Brazilian, actually.
Ela fala português também.
Entendo un poco, sì, però.
Bella, bella.
What page are we on, John? I'm so sorry.
No problem. I take it as a compliment.
Page 454.
454. Here we go. Barbara is an Italian, even better than Brazilian. She has studied and taught chiefly in Germany. She now teaches environmental and social philosophy at Oregon State University and is co-director of the International Association of Environmental Philosophy. And from 2011 to 2014 at the University of Jena, she was senior scientist in the Advanced Research Group, Post-Growth Societies. In 2014, she was a member of the organizing committee of the 4th International Conference on Degrowth for Ecologic Sustainability and Social Equity. Her most recent publication is about a project for radical transformation of society. How do you say it? How do you say this wonderful French word?
Décroissance,
Oh,
which
you
is
say it so
the
beautifully.
French word for degrowth.
Like having no croissants.
No.
Oh, like having no growth. Oh, croissant.
Wonderful. We're delighted to have you both here.
Thank you.
And we invite you to please begin.
So I should start it with a few words? Is that
Yes, Barbara, if you will help us and share your ideas, and then John will respond, and we'll open it up for people, question and conversation.
Thank you so much. I would really rather be there with you, and it's impossible. We have quarters. We're in the this is the first week of the spring term here, so it's super full. I couldn't manage to leave, but I'm happy to be here virtually present at the conference. And thank you to John Quiring for a very interesting comment which he sent to me earlier, and I didn't send mine to him. I'm sorry about that. But so his comment is giving you a little bit of a summary of my piece. So what I was thinking of telling at the beginning is not repeating the chapter that you have in the book, but kind of embedding that in a larger perspective. So since I have 5 minutes, let me start saying that the encyclical is an amazing hermeneutical masterpiece that I think the Pope and the people working with him in writing that piece have accomplished. I would sometimes I don't have the time for doing it here, but I sometimes provocatively say that I would like to reconstruct the hidden bibliography of the encyclical. All the references that there are kind of in the background, and the Pope doesn't mention those references because it's a hermeneutical masterpiece, because the Pope has all the debate in political ecology, liberation theology, post-development, all this is in the background, I would say. But the quotes the references that appear in the encyclical refer mainly to the tradition, the Christian tradition of thought. And this is great because he wants to show that way that it is really essential part of the Christian tradition of thought to refer to these other sources such as political ecology, post-development, liberation, emancipation, etc. So I think this is an aspect that we'll be discussing later on, also commenting on John's piece. So let me focus on a few points here. One is that I read into the encyclical the perspective of so-called political ecology, which I really like in its French tradition. First of all, the encyclical is very well informed about science and not one-sided at all. If you read the passages on the GMOs, you see how precise the reconstruction of the complex scientific debate is, and the reference to the political problems related to that. But what I like of that is science is not taken as a guidance for political decision. It is very clear the stance that we shouldn't let science guide us about how we want to live in society. And this is one of the main messages that you find in the French tradition of political ecology with people like André Gortz, who say that it is a collective decision that we should make about the limits that we impose on ourselves as a society. Translated literally, this is a path of autonomy, deciding about the laws and the norms and the limits that we want to impose upon us, and that we should decide as a society how we want to live together in our common home. So this is an essential message on the encyclical, which I like very much. There is a risk in letting science guiding us that leads directly into ecofascism, for example, or technofascism. The second point that I want to stress about what I really liked of the encyclical is what is the perspective on environmentalism that I read into it. And provocatively, I'm kind of pushing that a little far and saying, I don't see either the Western imperialistic tradition of wilderness and protection of nature for its own sake, and I'm stressing how imperialistic that is because it has been imposed on people all over the world. Indigenous people have been evicted in the name of our own model of nature and wilderness. So the encyclical neither has that perspective, nor the other one, which is the most mainstream one, which is the gospel of eco-efficiency, which is the perspective of the green economy and green growth, which is considering nature as a mere instrument for the human economy. I would say that the Pope clearly takes the position which political ecologists like Martin and Sallier call the environmentalism of the poor, which is the struggles that indigenous people, small farmers, peasants all over the world are fighting to defend their own livelihoods, to defend their own relation to the land and all its inhabitants, both humans and non-humans. So they struggle for a relational view. It's not about the nature for its own sake, and it's not about nature just as an instrument. It is about a relation to the land. It is about a relational understanding. And my final point is what is basically my chapter on how that relates to degrowth and the degrowth movement that started in Europe a few years ago and now grew into an international movement. The Pope clearly refers to that. Interestingly enough, the passage that also John Quiring quotes in his chapter, the only language in which the term is not the term of art used by the degrowth movement is English. If you look into the version of the encyclical in French, Italian, Spanish, even in Catalan, you will find the word décroissance, decrescimiento, decrescita, and so on. In the English translation, interestingly enough, no one dared using the word degrowth, so you find decrease growth because it's kind of scary to use the term. So I found it's interesting that the Pope is clearly using that term in all the other translations. And the idea of degrowth is that the global north has a moral and ontological obligation to stop the race towards more growth, more acceleration, more production, more profit, while the global south has the right to reach a minimum level of welfare and to find a way as an alternative to development, to the mode of development, the model of development of the global north. Degrowth does not only mean less growth. This is why decreased growth is not the same as degrowth. Degrowth is an alternative way of rethinking how we live together in society and reappropriating the political decision about our common living. It's an alternative mode of living together, no longer based on accumulation of profit, on competition and on inequality. So it's not just everything stays the same and you take growth out. It's rethinking and reshaping the whole structure of our economies and society, making them independent from this dogma of economic growth. And I see that very strongly in the encyclical. I leave it here. I think I spoke more than the 5 minutes given to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is not live, just for you to make sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. I'm going to teach you about the chapter that Barbara wrote in a book. Barbara Muraca's chapter is Care for Our Common Home and the Degrowth Movement, a message of radical, who should I look at? Radical transformation. While she expected that the encyclical would play a crucial role only in the countries of the global south, she has been surprised to note serious attention paid to Laudato by some within the strongly secular European degrowth movement. Indeed, degrowth is one pole of the climate justice for which Laudato appeals. This is the quote from Laudato. "The time has come to accept decreased growth in some parts of the world in order to provide resources for other places to experience healthy growth." Paragraph 193. Furthermore, Laudato reinforces the social ecology perspective that explains degradation of nature as rooted in social oppression, including gender, class, and ethnicity, and Barbara emphasizes gender. Now I shift to Muraca. Muraca undergirds the degrowth project with further sociological analysis of the transformation needed. In terms of my own reading of Laudato, is emphasizing a dialogue of everyone to transcend polarizing extremes, I would suggest an interpretation of Muraca as positioning Laudato and the degrowth movement between poles of neoliberalism on one hand and naive utopianism on the other hand. Perhaps 2 sentences from Barbara's chapter constitute a thesis. One, that the encyclical cracks open the mantras of technocratic, economistic, and neoliberal TINA narratives. That's there is no alternative, TINA narratives, and opens a dimension for imagining alternatives. Second thesis statement, the encyclical is a masterpiece in developing a new imaginary, I think she didn't use that term now, for envisioning a radical transformation of society by recalling deeply rooted ideals shared by many different traditions within and beyond Christianity. On one side is the dominant paradigm that supposes there is no alternative, TINA, to policies of continuous growth, economic growth, and technological innovation. TINA assumes that to stop growing means endless recession, increasing inequality, and destitution. The opposite side, the opposite extreme, would be realism's dismissal of utopian thinking as naive hope. Additionally, the encyclical warns us against the naive faith in technological fixes. I mean, so there might be naive hope on both left and right sides to worry about. Just worry. But Muraca asked us to differentiate between an abstract utopia that is merely wishful thinking and what Ernst Bloch called concrete utopias. Concrete utopias have both a prophetic and a performative power. They envision alternative imaginaries embedded in the contradictions of the present. Concrete utopias are spaces in which we can collectively start questioning pseudo-desires imposed on us by the existing structures. Muraca reinforces this with a Whitehead-informed analysis of social transformation as three-dimensional. The first dimension is structural and institutional, comprising economic relations and relations of power. These can be characterized as coagulations and sedimentations of long-term repeated patterns of belief, actions, collective practices that over time become habitualized. The second dimension is collective and individual agency, predicated on the novelty and creativity inscribed in the fabrics of the actual world. The third dimension is the social imaginary, a collective self-understanding that justifies and legitimates. It can be, the social imaginary can be hegemonic or subversive. Currently, an alternative imaginary challenges the hegemonic social imaginary by pointing to the contradiction that the growth paradigm promises us all prosperity, but we see increasing global stratification and Western middle class decline, or shifting of the Western middle class to the east or the south. Challenging the social imaginary involves reinterpretation and resignification to reclaim the capacity to decide not only about our lifestyles, but also about the conditions of our common living. I'm making a lot of quotations here. I'm just not telling you where they are. But Muraca says there can be no radical shift in this collective imaginary if we do not start challenging a separation between care and production. This is the gender, this is the social ecology gender analysis. This invokes a gender analysis that is absent from Laudato. We talked about this yesterday, Barbara. She writes, caring for our common home will never work if we do not reconceive care and care relations beyond patriarchal domination. And then a plug for more than a plug, for the degrowth movement. The degrowth movement embodies or perhaps the alternative imaginary now needed to realize Laudato's vision. On the one hand, a degrowth blog affirms Laudato for avoiding two traps of depoliticizing productivism. One of the traps, privatizing blame for overconsumption. In other words, blaming us rather than the corporations and the advertisers, rather than tracing it to deeper structures. And two, making technology either the culprit or the hope, pure culprit. Indeed, Muraca parallels Laudato with the convivial technology of Ivan Illich. Tools need to serve individuals, not just managers, and I would add investors, to enhance collective self-determination rather than addiction-like dependency. On the other hand, the 2014 Degrowth Conference was a proving ground for degrowth. Delegates tried to live up to the principles for a future society beyond the dictate of economic growth. There you saw gender equality, basic democracy, consensus-oriented decision-making, basic income, redistribution, self-management, reduced working hours, and care, shared child care during the meetings, avoidance of one-sided overworking, convivial meals, care of emotions and the needs of the body. In conclusion, lest anyone shrink from Barbara's affirmation of radical transformation, radical just means thoroughgoing, comprehensive, far-reaching, getting to the root, radix, of the human condition. Not extreme, except on a very narrow spectrum of options, which we do live under. It means revolutionary, but most of us are already enmeshed in revolutions. We're up to our neck in revolutions. So Abrahamic, individualist, libertarian, scientific, industrial, informational. I mean, who cares if we have another revolution? Some domesticated and some sclerotic, petrified revolutions, and some perhaps out of our control.
Thank you so much.
Did you want to respond, Barbara, to John? Then we will open it up to questions.
Well, there is not much to respond to. It's in a very, very precise, careful, and generous presentation, a paper that inspires for further discussion. So I would rather open to discussion now, and I'm very touched by such a great comment by John. Thank you.
And who would like to begin making a comment, or who has questions? Yes, John.
Barbara, I have had the impression that degrowth put some emphasis on the rich world actually growing less consumptive than it now is. Am I not?
Can you hear that, Barbara? Can you hear what John Cobb said?
Yeah, I heard him until the last word, which I missed. Sorry. So I heard, so the degrowth is about the global north getting less consumptive. So I got that point, and then I don't know whether there was another one.
No. I was just saying, this morning when I heard it, it was about not building the whole plan around growth, but rather allowing some to grow and others not to grow. I thought that previously I had understood it really was focusing upon countries that are over-consuming now, actually reducing their consumption. Is that correct?
Thank you, John. Well, yes and no, in a sense that there are different positions within the degrowth movement, which is quite heterogeneous. This is the one that I am more comfortable with because I don't feel, as a citizen of the global north, comfortable to go to poor countries and tell them, oh, your poverty is so wonderfully picturesque. Why don't you just stay there? So the one way of putting is that degrowth is an obligation for the global north to reduce the impact on not only on ecological resources, but also on social resources in terms of a continuous acceleration of the pace of life. However, there are movements, especially in Latin America. So we are in contact with people like Alberto Acosta in Ecuador. I'm going to Ecuador in May, in fact, for a conference on post-development and degrowth, who are very interested in degrowth, not very much in terms of using it as a paradigm for the global south, but in two senses. One is that the obligation from the global north is not only about reducing, but about changing the economic structure and reducing the pressure on the global south. It's a different economy. It's not just the same with less. And in the sense that degrowth fundamentally challenges the model of development of the global north. So that can be an interesting common ground with the Buen Vivir, for example, in Latin America, or radical ecological democracy in India, because they are both challenging the narrow-minded idea of development based on more stuff and based on increasingly more stuff. So this is where the alliance can come in, and when degrowth has something to offer to the global south. But you are right in saying that it is it's an obligation. It's an appeal to the global north.
Thank you.
Yes.
Barbara, I have two questions, if the chair will give me the privilege of asking. The first one, I want to play an Advocatus Diabolis and ask you, how can you draw from a Catholic Pope who represents such a large institution and values so much at variance with the vast majority of the degrowth leaders? You find one quotation in one blog of support, and in many other cases, not that. Can you talk to us about that connection that you're seeking to make? Are you a lone voice crying in the wilderness?
Okay, so I must confess, my reading of the encyclical is probably, if you want to, it's not very, how to put it, hermeneutically not very precise, intentionally so. So I wanted to push in a certain direction. And you're right, because as we will discuss that when we comment on John Quiring contribution. Indeed, the encyclical is written in a very smart way. It's very open. There is a lot that you can read into that. There is for everyone something to pick up. And so you're right. On the other hand, I find it extremely daring and bold to use, as I said, in the other languages, not in English, the very term of art that the degrowth movement is using. So it's not just, so the term décroissance, decrecimiento, decrescita, are not terms that have been used in a general sense, in a common sense so far. They have been used in a specific sense from a social movement. So there is an intention to directly refer to that. The other point is that looking at the context, all over the places, the encyclical does refer to not just to a green growth path. It's not just about greening the same economic path that we have been following so far, but it's clearly critical about technoscience. He uses terms that you otherwise find in undergrads, for example, or English. Technoscience is one of these terms. So this naive trust that the path of solution is a green technological path. I think this is not just me pushing that too far. I kind of find in the encyclical in different places that and they stressing the role of indigenous people and peasants. I think it's important. The passage about the right of peasants to property is a strong one. Yeah. If you consider.
All right, that's a great answer. And my last question: this morning you sent me 2 papers. I've just read them. The word socialism is not mentioned. It's mentioned once in a quotation from one author. But wouldn't the opposite of capitalist-based economy be a socialist economy? Why do you draw back from that apparently clear implication?
Thank you. Sure. It depends on what socialism or communism we're talking about. Being Italian, I have a strong passion for the word communism because this is the word that we have been using in Italy for a long time, and it was a different word, and because of the word commons. Communism sounds less government or state-based. Forget about how that word has been abused in the Soviet bloc. But the word communism is about the commons. It's about rediscovering the commonalities. So, well, socialism, you can say, is also about solidarity, and that's the core. So I would say, yes, the alternative has to be an alternative beyond capitalism, rediscovering communism as a horizontal, bottom-up structure, which does not require, again, a kind of fascistoid, is that a word, kind of fascist-like model of a central control of a central state, because this is just state capitalism. They abuse the word socialism and communism, but that's what we had in the Eastern Bloc, de facto.
Thank you. I've got a comment from online. Is that okay?
Please.
Hi. So Zach Walsh is watching online, and he wanted to know how the degrowth community is engaging the environmental humanities, philosophy, art, literature, etc., to form an alternative social imaginary.
Oh, thank you very much, very much. In fact, something that happened in Leipzig during the last degrowth conference was that we explicitly invited artists, not just to participate in order to entertain us, which is something that usually art is confined to, but we invited artists because they are activists, because art is one, if not the most powerful mode of activism in a world in which our imagination is being cropped, is being constrained, is being oppressed. So definitely, I think arts play a major role. And most of the people in the degrowth movement have an interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary approach. You have a lot of scientists who obviously come with an approach to science which is strongly influenced by a humanities understanding, because otherwise science is no use. So this is a very strong way of going beyond the disciplinary split and reappropriating the idea of education as Bildung, as a process of developing as human beings and not as serving the economy and producing people who have skills to serve this economic system.
Yes, Joseph.
Barbara, my question builds on this point and connecting it with the earlier discussion about degrowth and the translation of that, because for people who are not familiar with the literature, that idea is in some sense sort of counterintuitive, not only for the reasons that you point out, because clearly poor regions of the world in the global south would say, look, we simply have to grow in certain areas of the economy, whereas the countries in the north have to, in that sense, reduce their consumption. So there's a sort of heterogeneity that you point to. But I think the more important question, thanks to neoliberalism, is that there is a basically false understanding of what economic life and with it growth means. Because if you see economic life primarily in quantitative materialistic terms, then this idea that you're talking about now of conviviality, Bildung, more relational and more qualitative ideas, all right, gets sort of downplayed. So the issue is really a philosophical one of how one understands the very idea of economic life, whether one should understand that in terms of quantitative measures, which has been the prevailing neoliberal alternative, or whether one should go to more qualitative and relational measures, as for example, the Kingdom of Bhutan has done when it has substituted gross domestic happiness as a measure for how to assess that society rather than gross domestic product. So there is a tangible way in which a country from the global south, in this case the Kingdom of Bhutan, has said, look, we need to revision the very idea of what economic life is all about. So my question to you is, how does one, at the levels of power, push ideas like that coming of Bhutan, and there are many, many ideas of that kind, where these ideas will be given more prominence and paid more attention to, rather than simply dismissed as being sentimental or marginal.
Right. Thank you so much. Well, this is more than just one question. I am less enthusiastic about Bhutan than you are. I think it's an interesting thing that has happened there in replacing GDP with a different indicator. But if you look into what happens there, it's a small country, relatively homogeneous. A lot of people, especially immigrants, are being completely excluded from the understanding of wealth. So this is where I am a little critical. I think it's an important message to the world that we can substitute, we should replace GDP. GDP is a bad indicator. When I talk about growth and when the degrowth movement talks about growth, it's not only GDP growth, it's really the whole structure of modern capitalistic neoliberal societies. So it's not just a measurement, the problem, but it's the whole society revolves around economic growth. In this country, even more than in other countries, the whole pension retirement system revolves on growth. Everything is around that. So you have to change the basic structure of society. It's not just an indicator in order to make them less dependent on economic growth. The word degrowth is counterintuitive. And I agree. I'm not sure I like it. It just has established itself so strongly in the movement. And I think it has the power of, because of its negativity, it might have the power of not being too easily co-opted by the mainstream narrative, which is a narrative of, yes, of happiness and happiness intended as an individual path, etc. So I think that it has a power because it sounds negative, but not to the people who really identify with that. Let me just give you add another comment. about happiness. I think there is a whole debate around to replace GDP with happiness indicator. I think this is extremely dangerous and it's extremely neoliberal because we're no longer in the place in which growth only refers to quantity. It does, but it refers also already to quality in a very detrimental way. It refers to our quality in the sense of our intelligence, of our creativity, of our time, of our life energy that is being appropriated in order to create profit. So that is happening right now. And happiness is a very dangerous term if intended in the sense of individual subjective personal happiness, because it works perfectly well in the neoliberal paradigm. The alternative, which I think is interesting and is complex again, is what happens in Latin America with the struggles around the buen vivir debate, which risks being co-opted, is being co-opted, and at the same time is a powerful word to say it's about a common life. It's about how we collectively decide what a good life is and not personal happiness.
Thank you very much. And John, would you now like to give a presentation?
Yeah, what I'm trying to do is take Pope seriously when he talks about everyone, not just progressives, not just leftists, and dialogue, not just trashing each other. So I see thought about the environment polarized between the biocentric and the anthropocentric, between the Pope's eco-spiritual and the neoliberal technocratic. And I'm trying to play with those firewalls that keep these two ideologies separate from each other. So culture war polarization, and by the way, there are 60 quotes that I'm not going to identify and 17 footnotes that I'm not going to identify. You can find them in the book. Culture war polarization makes it easy to miss third way thinking in Laudato. If a lingering presumption that radical environmentalism is leftist divides reactions to the Pope's letter, both sides will ignore its invitation to everyone to dialogue, not just trash, not just laugh, not just condemn each other to hell. We'll need to dialogue about future scenarios, about the components, resources, pollution, population, factors of causation and remedy, worldview, agriculture, religion, technology, science, modernity, economics, politics. But if ideological diversity remains a hallmark of the whole spectrum of radical environmentalism, then left-wing and right-wing radical views can begin to consider mutual dialogue and then possible coalition. And if everyone's talents are needed to redress the abuse of God's creation, how might environmentalist critics be enlisted? So I've tried to listen to the conservatives and see if I can pretend to dialogue. Multiple readings and assessments were bound to arise from the Pope's 246 paragraphs, and that's not a letter. By responding to conservative dismissal of the letter, I seek to document a possible third-way reading. Something of a dialogue is hereby rendered. The first words I heard about the letter were from Rush Limbaugh. So you can imagine what a wrong foot I got set on. But how closely had the letter been read? How carefully can any of us read it in a culture of omnipresent media spin and counterspin? Rush Limbaugh said, Il Papa is basically saying to environmental wackos, they're going to have to also become anti-abortion, which they won't. So he's trying to drive a wedge right into the movement at the first opportunity. The consensus of scientists is bought and paid for. The Earth is not warming. We're in the midst of a 10-year cooling cycle. Well, how do you respond to that? So, I learned from Herman Daly. This is what economists say to Herman Daly. Another way to look at it, there's something for everyone in Laudato. Indeed, it is pro-life, but in more ways than one. Again, isn't all science funded, government and corporate? NASA says 9 of the 10 warmest years since 1880 have been in the last decade. Again, I think this is Michael Savage, the Pope's Marxist climate rant will be leaving everybody living in equal misery. And the Pope is directing mankind to worship the Antichrist, talking about some super government. It's blasphemous to call our ancestors greedy thieves. Well, is it Marxist to affirm justice, peace, love, beauty, credit, insurance, markets? But is it capitalist to teach the universal destination of goods and a social mortgage on all private property? See, I'm thinking there may be more than one Tina. There's a socialist Tina and there's a capitalist Tina. There's more than two, probably. Equal misery or climate justice? The letter says the time has come to accept decreased growth in some parts of the world in order to provide resources for other places to experience healthy growth. That's just justice. Is it ranting to say doomsday predictions can no longer be met with mere irony or disdain? Again, polarized focus on climate policy particulars obscures the letter's call for attention to matters beyond politics and economics, technoscience and reproductive health. Rather, and what is that level? Well, liberation from fear, greed, and compulsion. World government. Is super government called for by the Pope, or subsidiarity? Global consensus for problems which cannot be resolved by individual countries. But did not the near collapse of transnational finance in 2008 indicate the need for a countervailing power, a true world political authority? I mean, even the Financial Times of London said as much. We need a countervailing power to the financial dominance of the economy. And an antichrist, 1 John 2:22, does not contemplate the Trinitarian Lord in the beauty of the universe. Again, was the letter ghostwritten by Al Gore, Karl Marx, and Teilhard? No. The Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace. Peggy Noonan's warning that the church has been known to side with the wrong science, so you better watch it now, allows the letter's refusal of climate skepticism to obscure its more fundamental employment of family values. See, again, it's family values, but in more ways than one, at more levels than one. It's one common home for a universal family. I meant to say, Barbara, you didn't hear this. I'm trying to fill in some space where Catherine Keller broached the term pragmatism and strategic reprioritization. I mean, one home, yes, and then we talk about patriarchy, and then we talk about class, and then we talk about disability and other handicaps. The Weekly Standard warned against the encroachment of a state-supported environmental religion. But the climate change crusade gains a prominent leader, it lamented. But libertarian economist Robert Nelson sees a larger challenge to confront, the holy war between economic religion on the one hand and environmental religion on the other hand. There may be a place, for a functional equivalent, for some people, but Nelson is worried. Alas, the Pope's letter about our common home was bound to be trashed by some conservatives because, in the course of its politicization, the environmental challenge came to be seen as a single-interest anti-conservative movement, best handled by well-financed NGOs. And this is my attempt to correct that misunderstanding. A five-wave history of at least US environmentalism with global echoes has yet to be widely internalized. The first stage, the first wave, wilderness conservation. The second wave, activism and legislation, Nixon. Third wave, there was trashing in the third wave, but there was also greening of technology and business. Fourth wave, radicalization, deep ecology, eco-socialism, social ecology, ecofeminism, people of color, eco-justice. And the fifth wave, pragmatic pluralism. Pragmatism and pluralism has been around for the last 15 years, 20 years. So what is pragmatic pluralism? In the Pope's words, he doesn't use the label, but it's my label. Given the complexity of the ecological crisis and its multiple causes, not just one cause, we need to realize that the solutions will not emerge from just one way of interpreting and transforming reality. No branch of the sciences and no form of wisdom can be left out. By encouraging dialogue between sciences and religions, instead of polarizing debate and gridlock on geosystem issues, the letter probes causal factors beyond the usual suspects, inviting readers to consider the rich contribution which religions can make. Sheer overreach? So you might still be thinking, but how much can a pope know about science, technology, ecology, economics, and politics? Shouldn't he stick to his own business? Arguably he does, but he gets there by first noting the limitations of specialization, and after climbing out of the wreckage, so to speak, of colliding secular proposals, ecological economics, environmental economics, necessarily touching on so many points, given the complexity of causes, exposes him to misunderstanding from more sides than one. Perhaps philosophy of religion's expertise in managing polarized perspectives, believer, unbeliever, provides a context for mediating the letter's contrasting mindsets. Dialogue, because there's not one solution, the encyclical calls for a new open dialogue. I'm afraid I'm preaching, I'm shouting, I'm angry. This is a dialogue, this is just a pretend dialogue. A dialogue including everyone, not just environmentalists and scientists. Why open dialogue? Because otherwise we can remain isolated within the partial perspectives that leave us with incomplete information and the temptation to absolutize our own specialization. Disciplinary imperialism, it has been called. A fragmentation of knowledge and isolation of bits of information can become actually a form of ignorance, unless integrated into a broader vision. That's the Pope, of course. So what is the dialogue about? The nature of reality, not the economy, the nature of reality. To look at reality in a different way than most of us do most of the time. And how is that? Well, we turn reality into an object, simply to be used and controlled. Again, that's an instrumental way of reasoning, a purely static analysis in the service of present needs. And why is that a problem? It implies that we have stopped thinking about the goals of human activity beyond day-to-day existence. And what is more than what's in front of our face? A larger perspective reminds us that everything is connected, interrelated. Earth is our common home for millions of species, maybe 10 million, past, present, and future. Nature cannot be regarded as something separate or a mere setting in which we live. We are part of nature, included in it. But our common home is being mistreated, falling into disrepair. And we can discover what each of us can do about it. And it may not be the same thing that each one of us do. We do different things as we see what we might be able to do. Notions of common good and intergenerational solidarity represent human oneness at the moral level. To reinforce human oneness at that level of choice, we need to worry that ecology alone won't have significant results unless we struggle with deeper issues, like what kind of a world do we want to leave to those who come after us, whether we have children or not. We have students who come after us. Then what? Only after we've arrived at that level of awareness, discernible not only by popes and religions, but by secularists and philosophers and atheists and psychologists and artists, are we in a position to appreciate that variable future scenarios will have to be generated between the extremes of biocentric and anthropocentric visions. To biocentrists, the encyclical warns us that we probably can't sustain support for other vulnerable and defenseless species and individuals unless we acknowledge the worth of a poor person, a human embryo, a person with disabilities. To anthropocentrists, the encyclical warns that when human beings place themselves at the center, all else becomes relative. Thus, for all their genuine truth, power, and productivity, when well directed, science, technology, and markets can become unbalanced and destructive in the context of the globalized, omnipresent, technocratic paradigm and the cult of unlimited human power. It's not the science and the technology, it's the cult of human power, blocking access to any different imaginary cultural paradigm. Lastly, what would an alternative paradigm look like? And this is one of my favorite quotes. As the external deserts in the world are growing, because the internal deserts have become so vast, we can learn or rediscover another form of progress and development, degrowth. For the poor, growth marked by moderation. For the rich, less is more. 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 That is, if the consumption of the rich has negative repercussions on the poor, the developed countries can assist underdeveloped countries towards sustainable development. So the Pope's business, what was that? Evaporating the unhealthy anxiety that lays waste the world. How so? By demonstrating a spirituality of that global solidarity that embeds individuals in humanity, humans in life, institutions in a culture of life. That's the reprioritization. And then we talk about race, class, gender. It teaches the transcendent meaning of ecological ethics, embodying the Franciscan vision of the union of all creatures, employing the metaphoric complex of one universal family, one species, one life, Mother Earth, Father God, for a future shared with everyone. Future shared with past, present, and everyone. So that was my attempt to suggest how to dialogue with conservatives.
Thank you so much. And Barbara, would you like to respond before we open it up?
Sure. It's a really great honor to respond to that, and I think John made a much better job than myself in presenting the complexity of the encyclical, which I didn't, as I mentioned. So, and I also think that he did all of us a great service in engaging in details with the conservative critique and the conservative readings of the encyclical. I wouldn't have the patience of going through this critique because I tend to get angry too soon. So, and it's so important to do that. So I really enjoyed rereading the piece for the comment, and I thought, wow, that's great. I'm sure he had a lot of stomach problems while doing that, and I think it's terribly important. And so I was going to reconstruct his argument. I'm doing that briefly because he presented basically the main structure of his chapter. So he is very precise and fair in reconstructing the different streams within the encyclical and understanding encyclical as a dialogue between radical and conservative perspectives. He analyzes also the different streams of conservative critique pretty precisely and kind of offers them paths to enter the encyclical, to enter a relation with the encyclical. And he addresses especially the climate deniers and what I would call the lifestyle's responsibility deniers. Those who think that we have a unnegotiable right to a certain particular lifestyle, such as George W. Bush, who said the American way of life is non-negotiable. I'm not sure he would accept the invitation to enter a dialogue, but I think it's very important to show the different entry points into the text. And like I do, and I really like that passage, John stresses the importance of connecting science with social and political processes, what I did referring to political ecology, and about the fact that ecology alone cannot solve the problem, but the question about how we want to live together also with the perspective of future generations. And at the end, as he mentioned also, he stresses the attempt at mediating between positions such as biocentrism and anthropocentrism on the one and on the other. On the other hand, a critique of a biocentric perspective that does not sufficiently consider the impact on the poor, on vulnerable humans. And this is where I think the text is very strong, the encyclical is very strong in pointing out at global environmental justice issues. On the other hand, as rightly remarks, anthropocentrism is just as problematic by putting humans in the center. So this is a very, very brief rereading, but you have heard a very detailed presentation from him. Let me just comment on two main aspects here. To comment in great appreciation of the work that he's done in his chapter. I think it was a few months ago that the shareholders of Exxon started suing Exxon, bringing Exxon to court for spreading wrong information about climate change, which would affect their business, their perspective of having increasing profits. So this is already happening to them. The fact that they're manipulating strong evidence is kind of revolving against the very newly grown paradigm of increasing profit. So why I'm saying that, I'm not sure I want to seek any dialogue with Exxon and with a think tank putting money in order to fool us about what it's all about when we talk about climate change. But this is me. I mean, I think it's important that some do that. I want to fight them. I don't want to talk to them. I think they are probably very clear about what is happening around, and they have already their fallback option because they know exactly what is happening, and they're just investing a lot of money to manipulate opinions. On the other hand, and this is where I think John's contribution is amazingly important here, I do want a dialogue with people who are climate deniers mainly out of desperation. And I think we have to be serious about understanding what that means, because they do not see any possible alternative path which might seem desirable to them. So they have no other option than to be climate deniers, because desperation and depression closes up completely from reality. If anything, depression is really something that locks us up from what happens around us. And I think we're witnessing collective depression here. So those who have lost their houses during the recession need an answer, not an appeal to moderation. Not because the appeal to moderation is wrong, but they need an answer, and they need tools to understand what happened to them. And they need tools to understand who is responsible for what happened to them. They don't need apocalyptic visions about the end of the world, but they need a hope that other paths are possible. And they need what I try to frame, talking about degrowth, a concrete utopia. So it's very important to offer to them an entry point into the encyclical that embraces their fears, embraces their needs. And the second comment, it's framing in a provocative way, but this is me, right? So I would say the encyclical is pretty anthropocentric, in fact, and quite intentionally so. And yet, the point is, what is the anthropos? What is the human put in the center? If we put in the center the neoliberal human, yes, that's exactly the problem, because we have a merely instrumental relation to the rest of nature and to the rest of humanity. But what if we put a Whiteheadian human in the center? A Whiteheadian human which is intimately relational, is constituted by the relations to the land, to the trees, to the rivers, to the ancestors, to the seventh generation into the future. So then the whole perspective shifts. So you could have a kind of a anthropocentric perspective in which is no longer about one center and a periphery, but it's about a lot of different centers related with one another. It's no longer the center of the imperialistic West, which is the understanding of anthropocentric views, but it's a multi-centered world, porous, open to relation, constituted by relation, and spread all over the world. I think that the environmentalism of the poor offers that path to an alternative, which is still, if you want, anthropocentric, but it's fundamentally relational. And in fact, I think that care is the key word here. Care as it has been developed, constructed, and framed by feminists in terms of care ethics. And this is where I make the strong critique that the encyclical is contradictory in using care and not going all the way to understand what that means, to radically rethink care relations in our society. Because the whole paradigm of care is there, inspiring the encyclical, but the last step is not made. But I hope that might happen in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's time for us to stop and for lunch, but John, would you like to just have our last word?
About lunch? By dialogue, I had in mind Roger Scruton, Chet Bowers, John Blees, Gordon Durnell, Rod Dreher, Wendell Berry, E.F. Schumacher. So some radical environmentalists are claimed by card-carrying conservatives. So, and the Center for Process Studies has been in dialogue with some of those. So I mean, that's a precedent. It's not new to dialogue with conservatives.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you so much, and we hope to see you in person soon.
Bye, Barbara.
Thank you.
For lunch, you may go